All right. So we are at week 3 of developing cross-curricular and culturally responsive approaches to coding in the new math curriculum. And Christine mentioned that people had echo and different things. So we have some people who may be watching recordings, and we have other folks who've been dropping in. And so I'll just begin by welcoming you from wherever you're coming in from. Please feel free to let me know in the chat. I think we all know each other, but if anyone comes in, please welcome them and ask them to share who they are. As you know, I'm coming in from Treaty 3 territory in Guelph, and it is the traditional lands of the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabeg, and the Haudenosaunee people on the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And we are going to record our session for those who might not be here. And you can feel free to reach out to me about any questions, etc., that you might have. And I'm pretty easy to find online or by email. I'm just going to put in the chat a Padlet because Christine, what we did, well, just give me a minute and then I'll get into what we did there the first 2 weeks. This PD is coming to you from the Ontario Education Collaborative Marketplace in partnership with Dell Technologies and ALP. And OECM is the not-for-profit collaborative that helps all of our districts source hardware and work with other not-for-profit organizations. So we're really thrilled that they are doing all kinds of workshops like this with a variety of topics around achieving excellence, social and emotional learning, and equity and inclusion as the 3 big topics. So all of those resources, those recordings are online for you at the OECM website. And I think you've heard me share that I have been with ALP since I rewired from my district, Upper Grand, and I'm really enjoying working for a consulting company that is very people focused, K-12 and post-secondary. So if you wanted any more information about them, you could look up Advanced Learning Partnerships. So for benefit of Christine, week 1, we looked at coding and the curriculum. We explored microbits, but what we discovered was our group of folks here weren't so much interested in learning about the coding piece as they were thinking about culturally relevant and responsive pedagogies, cross-curricular applications, so examples of what teachers are doing. So we sort of went deeper into that piece in week 2, and we talked about examples. And on that Padlet, I've been collecting examples of coding applications, resources that can help you, examples of how people are using coding and the math curriculum in cross-curricular and culturally responsive ways. And at the end of session 2, our small group thought about what they would want to do next. And we had created a Jamboard with some things that people were hoping to learn about. So that's why we changed from the coding to the other piece in week 2. So 2 things came out of last week's discussion, and that was universal design for learning. So how might I embed the principles of UDL when planning for coding and mathematical learning experiences that are culturally responsive and relevant? And what considerations in my planning will support assessment as a natural and powerful part of student learning? And so I know all of you here are a big time into this work. So I've brought some examples of things. Hopefully we just have an informal discussion. And then I would really like to show you a few of the new things that I've added to the Padlet this week as resources. And then, stop me anytime. Let's just make it informal and really think about your needs and your questions and your sharing, please, because a small group makes it so valuable. You can talk about what you're doing in your classrooms. And I know Jennifer is at she's at Wilfrid Laurier. So she is, I mean, you could let us know what your work is this year. From what I remember when I met you, Jennifer, is you were working a lot with pre-service students. Is that still the case?
Yes, that is definitely still the case.
Okay, so those folks who are hopefully have had some experience in their lives around coding before they teach it, but not always the case, I'm sure. Welcome, Diane. We are just getting started. Hi, how are you tonight?
I'm great. Hey, Booker.
It's like
Hey,
nice.
How are you?
see you. I'm great. How are you? We need to catch up.
We do. This is great.
Nice to
Sorry,
see
Brenda.
you again. I was just saying how we sort of have left our last session to be about UDL and assessment. So my first question is, when you think of universal design for learning, I normally go to CAST.org. That is sort of my primary source for thinking about universal design. Is that what others are using? And just maybe you could share in the chat or grab the mic. And Jennifer has just shared that most pre-service students are terrified about the prospects of having to do coding. Oh, I'm sure you're letting them know how much fun it is, or helping them see how much fun it is very soon after they get going. I'll just say a little bit about what I know. I'm not in any way an expert on universal design, but in my work with special education students is where I first came across the UDL framework from CAST, and also in my work around assistive technologies. So, you know, this framework takes into account the fact that all learners are unique, no matter what their learning profile is, and that if we can remove barriers that make curriculum more accessible to all students, that would be a really great method, because it wouldn't be an add-on then. It would be designed into our processes right at the beginning. There would be multiple paths, if you like, to how people can learn. And so in terms of CAST, they talk about the goals of learning, and they divide those, so they provide guidelines in 3 different areas. In the area of the why of learning, so the affective networks, you know, what it feels like to be learning, ourselves as learners. So if you remember back to when we were thinking about those 3 clouds, you know, the interpersonal piece, right? About why, what learning means to us, what it feels like to us. The what of learning, so how we take in, how we represent our learning, and how we take it in, and then the how, so our output. So how do we demonstrate our thinking and our understanding, and what do we need in those areas? Are others familiar with this kind of a approach to universal design?
I can say from my perspective, I'm familiar with universal design for learning. I know at Peel District School Board, we're looking at universal design for learning through an anti-racist lens, and we're using some newer resources. I know CAST is rewriting some of their work through an equity lens right now, but we're working with 2 texts, anti-racism and UDL, and also culturally responsive teaching in the brain, as a inclusion coach team. So we're taking a look at how to use the universal design framework to move towards equitable outcomes. So by applying the culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy to the framework of UDL. Yeah.
Very nice. I noticed that they still have on their website, as I was getting ready for tonight, a call to have anybody who would like to participate in their refresh, and adding that equity piece. So that's super, super great. So what I like about this is, we think about the outcomes first. What do we want for our students? We want them to be purposeful and motivated. And therefore we think about that engagement piece. We want them to be knowledgeable and resourceful. So we think about those multiple means of representation, the what of learning, and then we want them to be strategic and goal created. Goal directed. And so we think about expression and, executive functioning and communication and all of those pieces. So again, really nicely aligned with what we know about deeper learning. And then what I like about this in terms of the framework that they have, and if some of you have used it, you will know this already, is that you can think about your learners and pop into certain areas and get just a little more look at what that might mean for you. So when you think about relevance, value, and authenticity, for example, we could open that up, and it talks about the kinds of activities you might provide, or just give you that idea of overall what you might be thinking about when you're creating your activities. So right there, it talks about authentic, meaningful activities. Sorry, my dog is right here. She's just shaking, so hopefully she's not too loud. Recruiting learners equally, personalized and contextualized to learners' lives, culturally relevant and responsive, socially relevant, age appropriate. So all those reminders of the kinds of things we've been talking about, and it fits really nicely. And then we think about engaging students. So, I think people will have their own planning and templates that they use for activity building and that kind of thing. But just wanted to bring that to mind. And in one of the new items that I want to show you this week, Raspberry Pi has actually come out with a curriculum for culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy in computational thinking. And that text you mentioned, Diane, is one of the ones that they used in their resources. So, it's really nice to see that a team of people are putting stuff together for us as educators, because we are practitioners that can't always do that research in the background. So just a reminder that one is really still quite powerful. It's been around for a long time. And I think what's really neat is that it began thinking about our special education learners, our learners with identifications, but now we know, like, no, we don't need to think that way. We want to remove barriers for all students. So, and one of the things that I think is beautiful about coding is that there is so much choice built into the actual activities. There's so much collaboration. There's so much opportunity to show things in multimodal ways that it naturally fits and aligns really well with universal design. And then when we think about the math learner and, when we address those multimodal affordances of technology, on YouCubed, I was looking through some nice resources around courses that they offer. And I thought this little 1-minute clip really expresses a lot of the advantages of coding with our students as well in terms of math. And Jennifer, feel free to jump in here at any point, because I know you are a real math specialist. And so we would love to have your view on universal design as well. So let me just see if I can get this playing. And I think I'm going to actually pop it into another, hang on one second. There we go. Except you're not going to see that, I bet. Hold on one second. Let's do it this way. And I might have to make sure my sound is on. Come on, computer. It's a little slow today. All right. Thumbs up if you hear the sound when I get started.
Another interesting new finding from brain science that's super important for math learning is that brain crossing, going across brain pathways, makes us learn math most powerfully. So what is brain crossing? We know that some brain pathways light up when we think about symbols such as numbers. Other brain pathways light up when we visualize, draw, or estimate with numbers. And visualizing and drawing and estimating are all really important to math. But new research tells us that when we're doing both together, when we're both thinking about numbers as symbols and we're visualizing and drawing the numbers, we're using pathways that connect across the brain. And that brain crossing, drawing and visualizing and using symbols together in math, is the most powerful math learning. You can see some examples here of brain crossing examples when we think visually about numbers and about fractions and algebra. We'll be getting you to do this brain crossing in this week of inspirational math. So you'll be doing lots of math examples that ask you to draw and see math and numbers, which will be important to your learning.
Any thoughts about what she just shared with us in terms of our coding that we've been thinking about?
I'm not necessarily thinking about coding, but I am totally showing that video to my daughter because math is something that she does not feel strong enough at and does not have confidence. And we have discovered that she needs it to be visual in order for it to make sense. Even last week, she had a quiz on rounding, and we figured out that if she underlined the number in the thousands, if she was rounding to 1,000 and put a box around the number in the hundreds, then her brain, she could see it, she could do it. It made it easier. And she went to school and taught a friend to do the same thing. And she was so proud of herself. Like, so I know that's not coding related, but I'm super excited about that video because it says what I've said to her. You are a visual learner, and that's a great thing to already know about yourself at the age of 9. And that's going to take you further. So I think that's awesome in terms of when I think about coding, like not just the doing it and seeing it, but the conversations that we have around it as well. And thinking about, how we start students with block coding. And so they're moving those pieces, whether you're doing it, physically on a game board in front of you, or whether you are doing it on a computer with blocks that you're moving, just to be able to see it and move it and then see it move on the screen or move the piece yourself, I think is so powerful, because then when we get to the point where we're trying to have them type out those if-then statements, and if I put this here, what does that do? Because that next step in coding, which for me in high school, that's how we started coding, was with if then else. We didn't have this fun block stuff to start with. I think that's such a big piece to be able to to think about it in different ways and then put it together. So I like that video. Thanks, Brenda.
Any other thoughts come to mind?
I'm having my TPA done. So I was talking to my principal. She's going to come and watch a core French class. And I've been doing some of the AIM program. And so I was thinking about how we were talking about it there, right? Like the AIM program uses speaking and listening, but there's also some reading and there's the action. So there's something that you can physically do while you're looking at and listening to. So I saw a similarity to that too, that different parts of your brain are being used and how that helps a lot of people having different, making those connections and not just focusing on one way.
Mm-hmm. And thanks, Helen. By nature of our digital spaces where we are doing coding, the multimodal piece is built in so much more easily than, like, you remember, Christine, those. I mean, I started coding, there wasn't even a graphical user interface. It was like the blinking cursor. You had to know it was only text commands at that point. And so we've got this beautiful time now where what Papert used to say is the the low floor, easy access, easy in, but a high ceiling, so much potential with the kinds of coding software we use, whether it's text-based or block-based. And then you make a really good point. The idea of seeing it as you do it, you know, and we know that good mathematics instruction includes as many manipulatives as we can find to use. And, you know, the testing, the hypothesizing, the seeing it work or not work, and being able to logically step through what you're seeing to debug your programming is really so active for the learner and can be very frustrating. So the more you add the collaborative piece in, you know, the better. Any other comments on that? All right. So you'll see a theme around the multimodal piece in a second. So when we think about, let me just see here. Sorry, there we go. Next, we also wanted to think about assessment. And so I wanted to share with you someone that I follow, Joni Casarano, Jay Casarano on Twitter. And she has a great blog called Harnessing the Power of Assessment. And she's got that right in her Twitter profile if you're on Twitter. But I will put it into the chat right now for you as well. And I think it's in our Padlet. If it isn't, I'm going to be double checking all my links after we're finished this week. I was so lucky to be able to work with Joni because she was one of the authors of Growing Success and that amazing chapter 4, which is all about formative assessment. And so she and I got together because we were thinking about her expertise around assessment and my interest in technology and her interest in technology too. So we did some work together looking at what is transformed around, what is the transformation around assessment? Is it the technology or is it something else? And so I thought maybe there's quite a few slides here. I'm going to go through it quickly, but you'll see, I hopefully where I'm going as we get through here. So when we think about that overall expectation, we think about what our students need to know and be able to do, right? We think about evaluation on the overall expectation. They need to solve problems and create computational representations of mathematical situations using coding concepts. And then we talked about how you would then be looking at the specific expectations, and there would be a progression of activities that you would do in order to bring out some of the coding pieces. So you might start by just working on sequential events, and then you might work on concurrent events. And a little later, we're going to look at that wonderful OAME infographic that really helps you understand what those are, as well as the teacher resources on the ministry website, because they've linked them in a nice way that you can get definitions for things. But also, you know, you have to remember that when students get coding and wanting to do things, have their program do things, they are likely not going to go in this very linear fashion. They are likely going to jump into some bigger, what you would say, specific expectations for older students. You know, today I was working with microbits with a grade 5-6 class, and we were, I don't know, on our second day together, and we were already doing conditionals, you know. So it really, they're driving the learning because they want to learn how to do things. And I think that's just great. So in terms of what Joni taught me and around what the assessment gurus are talking about are these two quotes. And I'm just gonna move I hope my windows aren't on top of this, but they might be. I'm just gonna move them over. So in terms of, take a look at these two quotes and read them for a second. I'll be quiet. And so when you think of a transformed, different way to think about an assessment, if we think about what Margaret Heritage and Pellerin are saying here, what does it mean for students? And what does it mean for teachers? If we're going to gather evidence in this way. Diane, what do you think?
I think one of the biggest connections I see between these quotes and kind of going back to the UDL framework is that students need to know what the learning goals are right up front so that they understand how to self-monitor their learning. So I think sometimes we invite students to self-assess or peer assess, but the criteria that they're provided with or the learning goal is not specific enough. So students kind of struggle through that. So I think that we have to do a lot of work as teachers to ensure at the beginning of a learning journey, we're identifying learning goals that are specific enough that students understand how to be successful. So yeah, I think that that's really important, and I think that's a hugely important component of the UDL frameworks, is that the assessment process is ongoing, that students have agency within the assessment process, and that it provides descriptive, like real-time feedback so that students are monitoring and improving their work as they go. And I think when I think about coding, and I think Christine mentioned this, there is real-time feedback, because when they try their code, if it doesn't do what they want it to do, they get that cause effect feedback, and they have opportunity to go back and try again and problem solve. And, you know, it's that self-monitoring is like built into coding. It's not that they get one shot at it, it has to work the first time. We're really focusing on encouraging students to use their problem solving skills, their critical thinking skills, to go back and kind of almost revise their code to make it effective.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. All that logical thinking, the debugging is such a natural way for us to bring in the social emotional learning pieces. You know, look at your stamina. Look how you really persevered. Look how you collaborated with someone else to solve that problem. There's so many just natural ways that I think that's what attracted me to coding, even though I didn't know those terms back in the day. What really attracted me to it was it as a thinking activity. How rich it was. So that's where I began. And I love how you mentioned the active agent piece, as students as active agents. And then we think about, okay, how are we going to get our students to that point where they can be active agents? And I have to say, we've got this in Ontario. We know this. We've been working on this formative assessment for so long. And I think it's just a matter of thinking about all the good things we know about assessment and applying it in this to coding. And do we really need to have something else different? Does there need to be any difference between how we would assess here and how we would assess anything else? So what does transformed assessment look like? It looks like students as active assessors. And you mentioned it already. What does that mean? Well, students have to have an understanding of learning goals and success criteria and what it looks like to learn something. And then they have to know how to use success criteria and learning goals in order to provide descriptive feedback. And they need to do that through peer and self-assessment. Why? So that they can support their own learning and so that they can practice using the language of assessment, right? So that's a big piece of it. So would we still be having our learning goals and our success criteria posted for some of our coding work? Yes, we would. We would still be focusing on that in the same way. And would we be still having students co-creating that with us? Yes, we would. Would we be revising it as we needed to, and as we learn ongoing in our units, we would, right? The same as we would for other subject areas. Would we be, having portfolios of our thinking? Would we be documenting the learning and maybe providing some scaffolding for our students like we would in other subject areas? Yes. Would they would need to be understanding how to give and receive feedback. And I remember Garfield Ginny Newman, in one of his critical thinking sessions that I was in with him, gave me a whole new way of thinking about, he said, why not have students give feedback on students who are giving feedback, like sort of zooming out and practicing that skill, and then having others, actually observe and give you feedback on doing so. So digital tools, whoa, make this so easy. The screen captures of the coding, the sticky notes digitally that we can put in here, the prompts and protocols, which we'll get into a little bit later, are really going to support you still in teaching coding and mathematics. The next thing is, the second piece to that is the students need to be active, but there has to be a culture of learning. And Helen, the idea of the process of learning, right? And the teacher, really good points, not just about the end product. And with coding, it certainly isn't. You have to do a lot of work in order to get to your end product. And what Jennifer's saying there too, you cannot be the keeper of all knowledge. And as soon as you enter into coding, which is amazing with students, they take you down paths that you don't know, right? So Papert had this wonderful analogy about, if you wanted to be a carpenter, you would hang around with some carpenters and you would watch carpenters learn. And he always said that we put students in a classroom with an expert learner, the teacher, and often they don't get to see the teacher learn something new. And that robs the student of that chance to see someone else thinking out loud and modeling their thinking, and all that good stuff that you can do when you don't know something. And I'll never forget two little girls, Joyce and Janice, that were in my first coding group in grade 2. And we were actually, we were using something, we were making interactive stories, I think. And we were using like putting text into a story, but coding it. And they asked me, did I know? I'm like, hey, try it. And they asked me, did I know if it was going to work? And I said, I don't know if it's going to work. And I remember them just killing themselves laughing, because the thought of a teacher not really knowing what was going to happen was just a whole new experience for them. So, it's wonderful that way. And not being the sage on the stage. So learning in a culture where they're seen as collaborative partners with the teacher, that all those things that you've just said there, where it's safe to take risks and make mistakes. And boy, that's going to happen when you're coding. So, setting that tone in your classroom, and we're working really hard in mathematics to have students feel safe trying things out, understand that there's multiple ways to solve problems and do mathematics, and that it's actually a very creative language, the language of math. And another thing that Heritage and Pellerin say is that there's three areas that help you build that culture. So modeling values and attitudes, and I'm sorry about all the text here on the slide, but it really is good, valuable words that Margaret Heritage has shared with us. So respecting your learners, building on the work of everyone, kind of like a knowledge building idea, rather than the idea of right and wrong, providing models for students. So modeling, what does listening look like? What is good questioning? How do we give feedback? What's our mindset? And I love what she says. Heritage says that she really views the classroom as a community of practice, and the rights of a child to engage in that community of practice. And so we have to make sure that the conditions are there for that, safe to take risks and make mistakes, integrate the instruction and the learning cycle, integrate assessment naturally into that process, and co-construct and revise success criteria as needed. It's a negotiation process, right? Not carved in stone. So there's just so much richness that can come from that. And then I think the other thing she doesn't ignore is that, in order to make these practices routinized, we have to establish some structures for them. And that's where, collaboration, collaborative protocols, how do we participate in conversations respectfully together? What does careful listening look like, and taking turns, joint development of thinking? What are our responsibilities and norms in our classroom for individuals and groups? All of that good stuff, which in itself is a huge piece, but it gets us to this idea of being a culture of learning together. And then, students really having some decision-making ability. And Joni, one of the things that I loved about the way she approached assessment and what our growing success says is that students are supposed to have some decision-making ability. They're supposed to help us they're supposed to make judgments about their own learning. We're helping them become self-regulated and autonomous learners. We're supposed to provide just the right supports at the right time. And there's a quote I love from Margaret Heritage where, and I'll read it to you because it's just, I don't want to paraphrase it. She just says it in such a lovely way. She talks about the student involvement and student agency and really giving students authority. So she says, in doing so, the teachers do not advocate, I can never say that word, their expertise in interpreting what students say or write to indicate their learning status. Instead, through scaffolding and shared reflection in the context of authentic practice of formative assessment, they invite students to join them as apprentices in the development of their own expertise. So inviting students to join teachers as apprentices in the development of their own expertise. I just love that. It's a different way to kind of look at assessment. And then assessment should be revealing students' current learning status. It's as evidence gathering, and they should be a part of that. So technology might be a huge part of this, right? We can have pictures, we can have discussion, we can record things, we can draw, we can have protocols, we can videotape. And as someone mentioned here, when you're coding, you're actually seeing it, if you're putting in weight statements, etc., you're actually seeing it appear almost like a video, a movie of what you've created. So that's another way we can gather our evidence. So the third thing around assessment, we are quite informed about, I would say, ahead of a lot of places around assessment for, as, and of learning. And we know that what we can do with our success criteria, the teacher is really using that success criteria as assessment for learning, right? Gathering information about student learning, providing descriptive feedback on their progress, making decisions for what are the next steps in the learning and teaching. Students are using it as well. If they're active in this process, they're using it as learning. And when the student actually knows how to provide feedback and monitor their own learning, it's assessment as learning for them. And so, another thing I always think about is we talk about critical thinking a lot and how important that is. And we know the word critical comes from criteria. And so every time we're engaged in the practice of assessment using our success criteria, that's critical thinking, right? Students are making judgment on their process or their progress using a criteria. And then the teacher will make the judgment. Joni was always really firm about that's our job. That's our professional responsibility to make that judgment. But if you go to harnessing assessment, what I love about Joni and her colleague that is also a retired educator and ministry person, they really dig into what it looks like to be grading, not just in a general sense, but they have a lot of posts there that help you make those decisions and talk about different ways that you might be getting to those grades. So it's really quite a they do a lot of great writing for us to support us. All right, so I am going to skip through a couple of things here. You know, the work that you're probably very well aware of from Joe Bowler about, you know, having a lot of conversation around authentic mathematics activities to keep the assessment formative as long as you can. Growth mindset and the social emotional learning piece it is a part of that. So when you think about technology and how it enhances this process, what connections do you make when you hear that piece around what is good assessment? What are you using that might help you in your practice with formative assessment? Or in what ways in general does technology help you, would you say?
I think it can help us give like that quicker feedback. You know, like if a student is working on something, whether we're walking around and able to talk to them, or whether, you know, I can jump into whatever they're working on and type a little note to the side or say, hey, I like how you did this. Have you thought about this? Or what are your plans for that? You know, being able to ask those questions that sometimes we don't always have time to ask. And that maybe the student can come back to when they open up whatever it is, that piece of writing or the coding that they're working on, and going, oh, okay, well, yeah, I didn't think about that. You know, being able to do that. And sometimes I think those are the pieces we don't always have time for. But maybe we have a chance to be able to look at what they're doing, you know, and connecting through them with their digital work.
Mm-hmm. Timely and even more visible to the student for some reason when it's in a digital environment. Agreed. Yeah. Some of the things, and you know, some of you might have access to something like Mindomo, but this is just one example, just showing, you know, when I was thinking about what would be my success criteria for a really great technology to be using, I think about, you know, what you just said about enhanced collaborative processes, right? You know, a student makes their thinking visible, that it can be multimodal. That would be awesome. Like many of our Google Slides, Google Docs, or whatever we're using in terms of, if we're using Teams, we're using all the collaborative software, the suites of collaborative software. We can add different modes in there. When you provide that feedback you just spoke about, Christine, on a collaborative document, everybody overhears you, right? All the students see that feedback you're giving. They learn how to provide positive feedback and descriptive feedback to each other by watching what you do in those online spaces. They're kind of like overhearing you. That's what I always think about it. I think of it like that. Conversations can continue beyond the day. And often they're really open and flexible. Students could be using multiple different kinds of devices with a lot of our tools. So those are sort of some of the things that I think about. And then when I think about coding, you know, just by nature of the fact that it's a digital space, same kinds of things. We can capture screen captures of pieces of code, and we can talk about them. We can add digital sticky notes. We can record students in screencasting what they're doing. And we can actually just test it, run it, and see if it works. And so, you know, it's very, very visual in that way. I just wanted to maybe go into the Padlet because I wanted to make sure there were a couple of things that people knew about. And so I know, Diane, you mentioned the OAMI resources, and in particular, the glossary that they have online there, and the description and images around sequential events, if-then statements. Whoops, sorry, kind of going crazy there. I find that really great, especially when you're using MakeCode or you're using Scratch. Also, you can set up, you can just right click on the desktop to snap screenshots of the kind of code that students are working on. So it really serves very well for, when you're asking students to deconstruct and change the code that they see, which is a lot of what you see in the curriculum. So I'm going to just, and then, I'll just get to that place before we finish here, because I have to end with a couple of minutes. All of the, when you see the progressions, you can click on your definitions and kind of get a glossary right in the ministry teacher supports. So that's another place to go. And then I just can't say enough about Project Zero's making thinking visible protocols. And, please don't forget that all those really great thinking routines and protocols, whatever you might call them, that you use for other kinds of learning still serve you really well in working with coding and mathematics. So you're still introducing and exploring ideas. So there's your See, Think, Wonders, your KWLs, your brainstorming charts, that kind of thing. You are still synthesizing and organizing ideas. So you can still do things like headlines, where you're asking students to give you a synthesis of what they're thinking in one sentence. In these slides, you'll have examples of 6-word stories, which I love using. So you could be asking students, what does it feel like to be a coder? You have 6 words and find an image. So for some of the teachers that I was working with, they were thinking about what deeper learning is and creating images around what that means. Students transforming learning beyond the schoolyard. So you have six words and images. So these kinds of things still support our work in mathematics. And also some of the most simple thinking routines are around asking, for evidence of your thinking. What makes you say that? One of my favorite exit tickets of all time is I used to think, now I think. I used to think coding was, and now I think, because what it does is it helps students express shifts in their thinking, which isn't easy to tackle. And we can do those in a variety of ways, even just in notes. Ask them to use that one. Okay. I just want to take a minute to send you to the Padlet. I'm gonna go there myself, and then here we go. So a couple of new things, pretty cool. Okay. So if we go to the coding resources space, you'll see I have the OAMI resources. So let me just go right up to the front. Sorry, my computer is a little tired today. It might be working too hard. Okay, what were my new things? So the OAMI curriculum resources are here. There's the infographic, okay? This one, David Thornburg. Okay, so David Thornburg is a pretty famous guy in technology circles. Do you know, did anybody ever use the software Inspiration? Okay, so before Inspiration, there was Calliope, and David invented that. And he also worked at Xerox PARC way back in the day, and I think had something to do with the development of the mouse, like brilliant coder, brilliant programmer. So he has created 2 books. One with Lynx coding software. So that's the one I was talking to you about, being the text-based one that's Canadian, that Seymour Papert was involved with. And he also uses Snap, which is a free block-based coding software from Berkeley University. And he has, let me see what's going to open. I wonder if you'll be able to see this. Let's see. Tell me if you see it open up on Amazon. Yeah? Okay. So, he's taking a look at teaching computer science through art and patterns of nature. So I thought that really fit with our cross-curricular focus. And I can tell you that all of you will be on my radar for if we get our grant funding for CanCode, because we'll be definitely buying these and sharing them out with people. So don't despair. If you would rather wait and try and get one that way, that would be good. Okay, Minecraft has a new build, Peace with Nature. Oh, here's a cool thing that I added, Raspberry Pi. Anybody familiar with Raspberry Pis? I have not programmed with a Raspberry Pi myself, but I know they're in a lot of schools. And so, and they are very inexpensive. So I wanted to let you know that they have, this is where I was telling you, they are working on a culturally relevant computer curriculum for computational thinking. And I wanted to show you the working group. What I know Mike Deutsch from Kids Code Jeunesse, really good guy. And the resources they were using, where are the resources? I was really impressed with some of the resources they've been using. And this is where I was saying, Diane, where's the book that you are been using? You've been using this book, right? By Zaretta Hammond. Yeah. Yeah. So they've been really, from what I can see, they've started from a really good place around some of these. And what it offers you as an educator is a lot of questions that you can ask in your practice around, you know, some of your thinking about your own self, right? And that's, I think, a lot of our work in this area is to, especially when we're coming at it from, I know for myself, my own journey around being a white middle-class person, you know, I have certain privilege when I come to thinking about things, and I have to really stop and challenge my assumptions and my biases, right? So these questions really help me think about that. I always think questions are the answers for sure. Okay, so there was that. And then I don't see anybody adding to our Padlet, but feel free to add. You should be able to add all your wonderful resources. And then I was reminded that I did not share turtle art with all of you because I saw this tweet this week from my friend Brian Sanders in the States, and he's using turtle art and he's using it with kindergarten students. And I wanted to let you know that it is free and it is gorgeous. It's a block-based program, and it is created by Brian Silverman. He is one of the coders for Scratch. You don't really hear his name very often. You hear Mitch Resnick's name from MIT, but he's a Canadian, lives in Montreal, and his partner is Artemis Pappert, who is Seymour Pappert's daughter. And so this is their version of logo because she's an artist. And so they do amazing things. And all you have to do is email them for the software. So it's free to use, and it's gorgeous. And they have a set of cards that the students can use also as they get into it. So there's just a lot of different ways you can go in terms of cultural exploration, design, and also cross-curricular examples. So I just wanted to make sure you knew about that. Okay, so I am going to make sure that you have the slides. And even though we aren't going to finish them, I'm not going to stress about that because you will have them. So there they are. We can never get through everything that we hope always. So I need to get to one last thing that I've forgotten to do each of the times we've talked. So Christine, we talked about Goldie Muhammad's framework a little in the second one. So if you ever get to that, that recording, you might hear a bit about that. I was going to ask you to do it. I used to think, now I think I'm not going to do that. Okay. I'm going to work on the prizes, and Dina or Katina, I do not believe are here today. So I'm going to do that on my own while you, if you don't mind, if you could click on that link and take a few minutes while I set up our prize wheel to fill out an ALP survey. It should only take a few minutes, but I've forgotten to do that every time. And I'm supposed to do it. So I'm sure I won't get in big trouble, but if you could kindly do it, that would be great. And let me get our wheel going while you do that. Let me just stop my share for a second. Oh, Maybe I don't want to stop my share because you're probably looking at that. Let me get it back to you. There you go. Are you seeing the slide? If you need. No. Okay, sorry, you were hidden under something there. Okay, so stop share. Yes. Okay, perfect. Okay, I need to run this and bring it down over here. And sort of if you're done, or you could let me know in the chat, just say done. I can probably stop the recording now as well.